Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we'll learn about Typescript Utility Types. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. I've also recently started a Discord server, and I've provided a link for you to join in the description below. It's a great place to post any questions you have about this video and to chat with other web development students too. Our starter code today is the code from lesson 8. This is lesson 9, so I'm just going to select all of the code in the main.ts file and press backspace. I selected all of that with Control A, by the way. Now I'll save with Control S. And we're ready to start the code for utility types, which is what we're discussing today. First, let's go ahead and start TypeScript if you haven't. So Control and the backtick to open a terminal window, TSC for TypeScript, and then -W for watch, and that will watch all of the files that we have in our source directory, and it will compile those to JavaScript in our build directory. Now, we've covered that in the first lesson, so if you're just jumping in here and you're not aware of that or how to set up the tsconfig file, you may want to go back to the beginning of this series and do the lessons in order. Okay, utility types, our topic for today. So I'll just put that up here at the top. Now, TypeScript offers many utility types that are helpful for common type transformations, and we're going to cover a lot of those today. The first type we'll look at is a partial. So I'll just notate that above here. I'm going to paste in an interface that we have. Notice this is called assignment. And it has a student ID and a title, both are strings, a grade, which is a number, and an optional verified, which is a Boolean. Now with that, let's create an update assignment function. So I'll say const update assignment. I'm going to set that equal to a function here that accepts a parameter called assign, and that will be an assignment. After that, we're going to say props to update. And we can specify these as a partial. So we don't want all the props, just the ones we're going to update. And this will be an assignment. Now I'm going to press Control Z so this wraps down. We can see our partial with the assignment here. And now we can just specify some of the props. Well, we don't even have to specify. We're just essentially saying that we're not going to require all of the props from assignment. So just the ones we pass in. Now this is going to return an assignment, and then after that we need to go ahead and say what our function is going to do inside. So I'm going to return an object, and we'll just spread in the assignment that we pass in, and then we'll overwrite any of those props we want to update. So here we can spread in the props to update. So this allows us to not pass in all of the props, but declare that they are props of assignment. So let's go ahead and look at how this works. Just below, I'll go ahead and paste in a assignment that we create here first. So I've got assign1. Notice it's got a student ID, a title, and a grade. It does not have the optional verified, and that's okay. Now, when we call this function, and you can see I'm going to log the result, I'm passing in this assignment that we created, and then I'm overriding the grade property. So that is the props to update that we're passing in right there. So again, it's a partial of assignment. And then notice I'm creating an assign graded underneath that, which is an assignment, and I'm calling that same thing. So I'm just saving that in assign graded, which we're going to use here in just a little bit. So let me save this. Now this code should run, but if you haven't yet, what we need to do is go ahead and start our application. I'm using the live server extension to launch our page. So here, click anywhere inside of the index.html. You can click Go Live if you have the live server extension, and it launches here in Chrome. Now we just have a blank page, so I need to open DevTools with Control, Shift, and the letter I. And now we've got our console here. I'll clear that out and reload one time. And I'm going to switch the view to the bottom for the console. So now we see just a little different view, and we don't see that browser over to the left. It's just hidden up here above, which you can drag, but I'm just dragging it all the way up. So there is what we are logging, and that is that assignment object. So notice it returned the assignment object. I'll go ahead and close the HTML file, and I will drag Visual Studio Code to the left and press Control B to hide the file tree. So now we can see everything well. And what we're logging here is on line 22, we're calling update assignment and having it updated. Likewise, we could have just logged assign graded, where I am saving that as well, because we're calling it again with assign1 and even the same grade value here as we update that prop. But this is using the partial utility type, allowing us to pass in an object that just has one property of assignment. Okay, now let's look at a couple more utility types. We're going to look at required, and if I could spell required, there we go, and read-only. We'll look at both of these utility types. And to do this, I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to call it record assignment, as if we're going to record this information into the database. So here I'm going to say assign, and now we'll say required, and we'll pass in an assignment. So what this does is it requires all of the properties. Remember, we had that verified property up here that is optional. Well, now by putting required, the utility type here, with the assignment, that means verified and all of the other properties are now required. Okay, after this, we're going to say this is also going to return an assignment. And we'll just create a function here. And I'm not going to put in all the logic, but essentially we'll send to database, etc., whatever we would do with the data. And then we'll return the assignment that we have completed that task with. So that is our record assignment function. And now all of those properties are required. So let's create a verified assignment, and I'm going to call that assign verified here. And you can see now I'm using the read-only utility type, so we can't overwrite any of those properties either. So we've created that, and what we're setting it equal to is the assign graded, remember that one that I created up here in the first example, plus the property verified true, because it is also required. Otherwise, this wouldn't work for our record assignment function. Now, if I took assign verified and I tried to change the grade to 88, that won't work because assign verified has all read-only properties. So if we mouse over, we can see cannot assign to grade because it is a read-only property. So that won't work. So let's try to call record assignment. And if we just pass in assign graded, remember that was created above and it only had the 3 properties without having verified. We created it right here in the first example. That won't work either because it will say we're missing a property. Yep, it's a required assignment and verified is not there. So that also won't work. However, we could go ahead and put this in an object and spread it in. And then we could add our verified as well. So we could say verified and true. And let's go ahead and end that with a curly brace. And now record assignment is okay because it has all of the properties. Verified is no longer optional, so that must be passed in to our record assignment. Now let's look at what may be the most popular utility type of all, and that is the record type. It's very easy to use. Let's look at an example here where I create a hex color map and I use the record utility type, and I'm telling it that the keys will be strings and the values will also be strings. And that's what we have here. And I'm just using the hex colors that we use in HTML, red, green, and blue. And you can see we've got a string for the key and a string for the value of each. But you can also create string literal types. So let's look at an example of this, and I'll say type students. I'm going to set this equal to Sarah and Kelly, and this is a union type of string literals. And after I do that, I'm going to create another type, and this is letter grades. And so, at least at university, we would have an A, a B, a C, also a D, and then instead of an F, we have U's. So U is unsatisfactory or failing. But there's our 5 different string literals for letter grades. So we've created our types, students and letter grades. So now if we create final grades, we could set this equal to a record, and the keys will be the students, and then the values will be the letter grades type. And if we set this equal, we can go ahead and create this, and we can give Sarah a B, and we could give Kelly a U, for example. And that works. That satisfies both of these because we have met the string literal type here for the values and for the keys as well. If we tried to provide a different value, say Z, TypeScript would not like that. So let's put it back to what it likes. And we can also do this with an interface. Let me scroll up and I'll create a simple interface below, and I'll call this grades. And now if we had assign1 and said that is a number, and we have assign2 and that is also a number, we can now apply this as we create grade data. So let me do that, and I'll say grade data, and that's going to be a record. And once again, I'll pass in the students, which was our string literal type, as the keys, and now I'll pass in grades as the possible values. Now inside of this, we'll say we have Sarah, and now this is an object, as grades is our interface, and we'll say assign1 had a score of 85, and assign2 had a score of 93. Now let's put a comma after that, and we can put in Kelly as well, because we have to have both students in. And now this needs to match, so I'll just say assign1 is 76, and assign2 a 15, which is why Kelly got that grade of U. So that's the record utility type, and you can see we went from a simple example where we specified just a string to where we used different string literal types here, and then we also used an interface. So it can be used in several ways as you create your record object. Now let's scroll for some room, and we'll look at a couple of useful types that go hand in hand, pick and omit. So as we look at this, let's start with a type, and we'll call it assign result. Let's set this equal to pick, and we'll pass in our assignment that we have created before. And now let's give a string literal here for the possible values. So we'll say, let me get a lowercase, there we go, student ID, and then let's also have a union type and say grade. And so what we have done is we have picked what we want to use from our assignment that we created way back up here at the top. If we look back at the assignment, we had student ID, title, grade, and verified. And now we're picking the properties that we want to use as we create this new type assign result, and we used student ID and grade. So let's create a score, and we'll say this is an assign result type that we have created now. We'll set this equal to a student ID. You can see I should accept the help instead of trying to type, so VS Code is helping me because it already knows what we've defined in the type. And then grade, and that is an 85. And now TypeScript is happy because we have provided both of the properties that we picked from assignment as we created score. And now, as you might guess, omit will do the opposite. So let's say type assign preview, and we'll set this equal to omit. We'll once again pass in the assignment. And now we'll say what properties we want to omit. So we want to omit the grade because we're previewing, we won't have a grade yet, and we want to omit verified as well. So now when we use this, we'll say const preview, and we'll say this is a type assign preview. And now let's set this equal to an object that will have the student ID, and we'll once again say K123 just to have a random value. And we need the title. And for the title, we can just say it's the final project. And TypeScript is going to be happy because we provided both things that were required once again, and we omitted the grade and the verified. So if we switch this, for example, to grade, TypeScript is not going to like that. It needs both of the properties that were not omitted. So now as we worked with pick and omit, if we scroll up, you can see we're applying those to an interface that we have. So I really want to highlight that because they could be confused with the next two types that we work with here. And as I enter those, they're called exclude and extract. But they're not going to work with an interface. They're going to work with string literal union types here as we apply these. So let's say type adjusted grade. We're going to set this equal to exclude, and now I'm going to pass in what we created for letter grades, and you can see TypeScript was even highlighting what those are. If you remember, that was a union type of 5 different string literals, A, B, C, D, and U. After that, I'm going to tell it to exclude the U string literal from that union type. And then let's say type high grades. And I said adjusted grade before, but this is high grades. We'll set this equal to extract. We'll pass in letter grades once again, and I'm going to extract the A and the B. Now this is a union type as well. We notice that we're passing in here. So high grades, if I mouse over it, it's going to say it's just A and B now, instead of everything that we had in letter grades, which was A, B, C, D, and U. Adjusted grade is going to be A, B, C, D because we excluded U. And now one more type to look at as we consider this is non-nullable. There we go. And I'm going to say type all possible grades. And here we'll call this a union type, and I'll have Dave and also have John. And then after John, I'm going to have the possibility of null and also the possibility of undefined. So Dave and John could receive grades, but also it might be possible that we would have a null or undefined. However, if I want to create a type that says names only, now I'm going to set that equal to non-nullable, and I'm going to pass in our all possible grades. And let's look at the difference. When I mouse over names only, it's only equal to the union of the string literals Dave and John. It has excluded both null and undefined from our all possible grades type to now just create a type that has only the Dave and John string literal union. Our final few examples are going to be a little more complex, so I'm going to scroll up for some room. And this type example is going to be the return type. There we go. And so let's look at what could happen here. I'll say type new assign, and I'm going to create a new type here that is going to require a title, and it's going to be a string, and I'll say points, and that's going to be a number. So we create this ahead of time before we create a function. That's the typical way you have seen this set up throughout this series. And then we would, of course, provide the return type of a function. So I'll say const create new assign, and then this new assignment is going to receive a title that's going to be a string, and then it's also going to receive points. It's going to be a number. And then after that, we could say it's going to return a new assign. And then we'd go ahead and set up our function. And on the inside of the function, we'll say return, well, it's an object. And since the variable name title is going to match the property name, we could just say title and points. And now it's happy. We have this create new assign function, and we're passing in both a title and points, and we're getting a new assignment at the end. But the problem is, if we change this function, then we also need to change this type. So we've got a couple of things we have to work with to change. But what if we didn't have the new assign return value right there? We didn't say this was new assign. Let's just go ahead and comment this out and not have our new assign type yet. We could create this function, and then after we create the function, then we could say type new assign, and we can set it equal to return type, and now we'll say type of, and we'll pass in our create new assign function. And now let's look at what we get for our type new assign. It looks the same as if we had created it above, but now if we change create new assign, it's always going to update our return type new assign that we have here. And this is very useful, especially if you're working with functions that you didn't create. So you bring in something from a library and then you update that library and it's changed the function and the return is different. Well, now the return type will automatically be updated too. So I'll just paste in a quick use of this function. We'll go ahead and create tsAssign, and then its assign type here, or it's going to return new assign, and it looks like I spelled new assign with a lowercase in there. I needed the uppercase, and TypeScript helped me find that mistake. So the return type, or the type of tsAssign, is going to be new assign, and then we're going to call create new assign, and everything looks good. So let me go ahead and save, and now we see we've got our title and points over here in our new assign object that was returned. And now the next utility type we're going to look at follows this same theme where we can derive a type from a function, and it's called parameters. So we're going to derive a type from the parameters of the function instead. So I'll say type assign params here. I'm just going to set this equal to parameters. And now I'll say type of once again, and I'll once again pass in our create new assign function. And now if I mouse over and we look at the params, it's a tuple, and it has the title, string, and points number. Now this tuple can be very useful. I'll mouse over once again just so we can see that value. Okay, underneath our type that we've just created with the parameters utility type, let's say const assign params, or assign args, because now we're calling it. So we pass in arguments when we define a function. We use parameters as placeholders for those arguments when I'm being specific. There we go. So assign params is the type as well. Now let's set this equal to, and we'll give some values here in a tuple. So I'll say generics, and then I'll say 100. Now that satisfies the parameters. If you remember from above, when we did that, we had the title and points. So here's our title and points, and they're in the assign args. So now when we call this function, say const ts assign to, and this will be a new assignment, and we'll set this equal to create new assign. Now we can just spread in the assign args that we just defined above, and this is going to call our function accurately. So if we say console.log and we say ts assign to, we should see that value. I'll save. And now we have title generics and points 100 once again for our second assignment. And now for the final utility type that I want to cover, it is a newer utility type in regards to the others we've covered. So in a more recent release of TypeScript, we now have the awaited utility type. And I'll just type here, it helps us with, if I can spell with, the return type of a promise. Now we haven't worked with promises yet in this series, and this is a good time to show an example of a fetch function. So I'm going to fetch users. I'll just paste this in to start off with though. So let's break this down. We have an interface here called user, as an ID, name, username, and email. And now here is our fetch users function. And notice the return type is a promise, and it's going to have an array of users. Now I'm fetching data from the JSON placeholder website using thenables to then return that data or catch an error. And notice here we have the error, instance of error. So if we have an instance of error, we're going to go ahead and log what that is. Now you can set up a fetch function in different ways in TypeScript. I'm choosing to do it this way so we can catch the error here with the thenable, or we can return that data. And notice I'm setting that to data here, so TypeScript gets the return that it wants down here with the data. But this is returning a promise that has the user array right here. And of course, we're resolving that promise as well. So now to get this return type, if we were to use awaited, let's put type, and I'll call this fetch users return type. I'm going to set this equal to, let me first do it without awaited. So I'll just say return type, and now we would have type of fetch users, just like we saw in the return type example above. But look what happens when I mouse over fetch users return type. It says it's a promise, and then it has the array of users. And we don't really want the promise, we want the result, right? That should be the return type. So here I'm going to say awaited and wrap everything else that we just had. And now let's mouse over and look at our fetch users return type. And it's the type we want. It's our array of users. So now if we call this function, we could just say fetch users, and then I'll put, of course, the operators to call the function, and then have my then, and then we'll have our users data after that function. And I'm just going to console.log users here. And let's save and take a look. And now we have all of the users that we just requested from the JSON placeholder website. And we can accurately get that return type if we need it by using the awaited utility type. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection. and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.